story of kind of how we got to where we are. And so with any good story, especially since this is a Disney theme. So once upon a time, there was a young man named Adam True, and Adam grew up on a small island called Hilton Head, and he decided to make the smartest decision of his life and attend Stetson University.
Yay!
Hey, great choice, Adam True. Well, Adam's parents, Bill and Lauren, wonderful people. We connected immediately because being a fellow South Carolinian, I'm Floridian now, but I met them the summer before Adam enrolled at Stetson. So we've become fast friends, and one thing led to another. There's Rena. They were very kind enough to invite us to Hilton Head for the RBC Heritage Golf Tournament a year ago in April. And that was quite the trip, because during that time, and if you saw the call a couple of weeks ago, the Kuchers, Peter and Meg Kucher, whose son Matt is a pretty good golfer. I happened to meet them there, and also met a lot of people there. But the picture with Jody and myself, that's my roommate from college, Alex Orr, who lives in Charleston. And so Jody was kind enough she has offered to help us with a number of things at Stetson. And so this will be the first, but hopefully not the last. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Miss Jody Jean Dreyer. Jody, take it away.
Okay. So what I thought I would do is just to set the stage and get a little bit of street cred with you guys. I'll give you a little background. So starting with my Disney experiences started when I grew up in the Midwest, and we would head down to Walt Disney World. And this first picture is my family on our first trip to Disney. And I'd like to give a special call out that nobody liked me enough to say I should probably have bangs as a child with the killer forehead there. But that is the year that Walt Disney World opened in 1971. And our family would save up, and about every 5 years we would go back. And I just caught the bug and decided that I wanted to head down. And I was at the University of Kentucky, and I heard about the Magic Kingdom College program. So the next slide is just to prove that I did indeed graduate. So I have, the credentials, graduated from the Disney University on the college program. And then my first job is I was a can-can dancer in the parade. And my dad, who had his doctorate of nuclear engineering, would constantly remind me, you will get to an age where you will not be able to kick your leg any higher to be a can-can dancer. So you better go back and graduate, because he knew I was having such a great summer. And we would dance in the parades and then go to classes learning about all the various pieces to the operation as a part of the college program. And then when I graduated, I was offered a job in guest relations, the tour guides. And my claim to fame was that I used to take the tours and know where every restroom at Walt Disney World was, which was really important information, I might add. And so from there, they have a program called the Walt Disney World Ambassador. And you can see from this picture, it looks like I'm not excited, like I was shot in the stomach, but actually I was super excited when I was named the ambassador. My older brother likes to say it's sort of like Miss America for Disney without any talent, and definitely doesn't look good in a bathing suit. So, but you do know a lot about Disney and travel around the world representing the cast members. So I did that for a year, and it was the year of the 15th birthday of Walt Disney World. So it was exciting because we traveled in the Mickey Mouse airplane, which is not in use anymore, but we would take the characters. The next picture shows us on one of our trips, and when the Mickey plane would come to town, people would come out and greet us, and then we would do a series of publicity events or different types of events, maybe in the city, whatever was going on at the time. And we sometimes traveled, it was the year that they debuted what we used to call Air Force One, which was our version. It's a Mickey hot air balloon. And there we are on the inaugural day launching the balloon. And this next slide I just wanted to put out there because I get asked a lot about, you know, did you have a plan and you went from here to there? And my career at Disney was this squiggly path that spanned over 30 years. And I had 22 different jobs. And I used to say that anytime I would, you know, get into one particular place and then I would meet someone and they would say, how about coming to do this? So I was really fortunate that I was able to keep the same 401k and yet move all around the world and different places at Disney. I did a stint at Disneyland Paris a couple years prior to the opening to prepare for the grand opening. And then over at Tokyo Disneyland and the groundbreaking in Hong Kong, and spent some time. The bulk of the end of my career was at the corporate offices, working in Synergy and at the studio and starting the corporate outreach program. And then I lived in New York for a while when we purchased ESPN and ABC to work on that integration. So the great thing is I was able to sort of look at it across departments and divisions, and it was an exciting time, a lot of growth in the company. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from over 30 years was that I learned that happily ever after, I think a lot of people look at Disney and they think, you know, it's all pixie dust and magic. And in reality, it's like any job. But I did learn that happily ever after really can begin today. And it's looking around and taking advantage of what's kind of right in front of you. So that was my little just quick intro to give some background. But always my favorite thing to do is really answer questions and get in some discussion because then I know what you're most interested in. But I do want to kick off and just get a couple things out of the way. So when people hear, the next slide is just the happily ever after quote. And then following that, if you can go to Goofy's picture, whenever someone hears that I worked at Disney for any amount of time, whenever I would do radio talk shows or appearances anywhere, they would ask, the number one question was always, is Goofy a man or a dog? And people would have a lot of angst over that. And so I'm just going to get that out of the way now and say that Goofy is a man dog. And as our Frozen sisters like to sing, you just have to let it go. That's just, you know, half man, smart like a human, and playful like a pup. And it totally works in the character world. So that's the number one question. But on a more serious note, people always say, what do you really feel after working in different divisions and time at Disney is the secret sauce? What's the magic behind the magic? How does Disney do what they do and continue to do it again and again at places around the world? And I think for me, I came up with what I like to think of as a public service announcement. And it's basically PSA, and it's people, story, and attention to detail. I think Walt, one of my favorite quotes of Walt is that you can dream, create, and design the most wonderful place in the world, but it takes people to make the dream a reality. And I think that's so true. And Disney obviously is not an exception and is really a poster child for that. It's, you know, an interesting fact, when I was at Walt Disney World, it probably hasn't changed, but the #1 guest letter, they get tens of thousands of letters daily from all the guests that visit. And more than the attractions or the merchandise or the food, the #1 guest comment, good and bad, is always about the people. So it's interesting, you know, characters make for great stories, and you can't circumvent that in any way. And which then leads to the S, which is story. And I think the stories that Disney tells, whether it's the attractions or the films or anything that they're doing, there's always a point to it. It feeds to the broader narrative. It goes back to the foundation. And I think that's, again, part of their success. And then the last, and perhaps maybe most important, is attention to detail. They're maniacal, again, whichever division you're talking about, anywhere around the world, and I'm not at Disney anymore, so everything I do want to preface and say is from the period of time that I was there. But I know that the mindset is still the same, that there is just, you know, when they choose paint colors in the parks, there's a color when you want someone's eyes to scan by and not see something. There's a paint color that Disney mixed up, and it's called Go Away Green. And it just sort of blends in, and, you know, they spent a lot of money and research to come up with a color that people just don't see. And so it's those little details. You know, at night, all the audio animatronics in each of the attractions are checked to make sure that they're moving and working. And so it doesn't always work, but the intent is that there's a maniacal attention to detail. And I think that really shows. So I just thought I would ask myself the first 2 questions, since those are ones that I get a lot. And then I'm happy really to talk about anything. I mean, particular jobs or, you know, places or interests that you have, or just anything. We can jump right in there.
How do you get to stay in Cinderella's castle?
Well, for the most part, it's a lot of the Wish kids that come through the Wish programs have magical experiences there. And then there are every so often kind of other events or things, but it's primarily kind of used for special events. It's not as much a, you know, just here it's available. But yeah, it's pretty fabulous. Except I do have to say, I've never stayed in it. I mean, I've been in it a lot, but I've never stayed. And I've asked people, and they say it is a little surreal at night when the park is empty, because you're really kind of a prisoner. I mean, it's not like you're going to get in your car and drive someplace. I mean, you're there, and there's certain areas that you can't really leave and just go run around. All the attractions are closed and security. So it's like you're a prisoner in the castle in the best sense of the word.
I wanted to mention one other thing just before Maureen leaves us, even though her screen says Woody O'Kane. Maureen, can you wave? It's Maureen's birthday today, y'all. So
Yay!
I want to say happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Maureen.
I hope you're going to do something fabulous, magical. Make it magical.
Yes, yes. I have to tell you, I was in high school when Disney World first opened, and my father ran a sailboat manufacturing company in the Clearwater area that was a vendor for Disney. And so when I was a kid, I would go down to the plant with my father on Saturdays, and we would play in the molds for the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea boats, which were never actually completely submerged, FYI. And he made all the Jungle Cruise boats. And in fact, in my family room in Florida, I have up on the wall over the fireplace one of the ship's wheels from the Jungle Cruise boats, and we had a map of the harbor of Clearwater put in it and a clock made out of it. But lots of fond memories of Disney, and have always had incredible respect and admiration for what they've done and the way that they have done it. So just great to hear your comments. I fully can relate to that maniacal attention to detail. I see it in the park. I see the value and the benefit of it. It's very inspiring. So thank you for all you've done at Disney, and thanks for sharing your story.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting going back to that time, to think about what was really there when it was the Magic Kingdom, Polynesian Contemporary, Fort Wilderness, but all the resorts that are now outside the Magic Kingdom, let alone the other parks, it was really a lot of swampland that they bought up in Orlando. So you probably even remember when it wasn't so built out as it is today.
Yes, I am old enough to remember the swampland. and I remember the orange groves. Kissimmee had a lot of orange groves. And I remember when Disney was buying it up plot by plot. Of course, nobody knew it was Disney at the time. Right. Yeah, and my family used to camp at Fort Wilderness, and just great experiences.
Yes. I remember, as someone who grew up in Kissimmee, I remember it very well, because the way people found out what was going on, of course, Disney sent somebody in. They were buying this property up in somebody else's name. But there was a reporter for the Orlando Sentinel, and she noticed all of these parcels in this area being bought up. She was the one who found out and published what was going on. And I will tell you, because growing up in Kissimmee, it was a cow town. Disney changed Central Florida, Kissimmee, Orlando, everything. Amazing.
Well, and even people that were first sent to work there, the stories that I hear, some of them that really wanted to live far away, they would buy property out in Kissimmee, and it would take a really long time because the roads weren't even done at that time. And I think initially, because Tupperware had the big area out by Kissimmee, that
right.
people thought it was Brownie Wise and some of the Tupper, Earl Tupper that were buying it up, and they kind of used that to their advantage for a while to hide who they were.
Yes, well, the roads that were 2-lane highways back then are now 6-lane highways. I used to ride horses around that area, but no more.
Well, some of our alumni who you might know were among some of the early employees at Disney. So I think the last webcast for the Alumni Association that I attended was with the Kuchar family. And Meg Kuchar and Edie Morley, now Edie Tingley, were sorority sisters of mine in Pi Beta Phi. And Edie and Meg, if I remember correctly, did the Singing with the Birds.
Oh, the Tiki Room.
Yeah, in the Tiki Room. And my roommate, Alice Smith, who's like a dead ringer for Snow White, was also a Disney employee. Tom would remember Alice.
For sure. Maureen, is that you speaking now? I'm not getting the speaker view on my iPad.
Yeah, if you go up to the top right corner and you click on gallery, you will see it. But yes, I'm now called Birthday Girl up there. Yeah. No longer Woody O'Kane.
Yeah, right. And I was Woody O'Kane for a while, and I was just losing my head with excitement. I wanted to share my cred along with your great stories. I graduated in 1972 from the Winter Park High School, and we sang. We were invited to sing in the grand opening at Walt Disney World in front of the castle, the Magic Kingdom, under the direction of Meredith Willson and the Florida Symphony Orchestra. And it's a moment I'll never, ever, ever, ever forget. We were bussed in at about 5 a.m. in the morning and rehearsed for hours, and then assembled in front of the Magic Kingdom for that great grand opening. The big deal was we got 10 books of tickets to use as payment for our wonderful voices. And we used those over the many months to follow graduation, and it was a great way to learn to enjoy all that Disney had to offer. So I'm thrilled, Jody, with your story, with your tenure there, and it has a soft spot in my heart as well by virtue of that experience. And I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Were you part of the big picture? They took everyone that was there on opening day. There's that classic picture, and there's the bands and everything. Are you in that picture?
I am. I was. There was all kinds of things happened during that big assembly, and it wasn't a band. It was the Florida Symphony Orchestra, and I haven't done a search, but I am sure could count on YouTube for having a copy of that grand opening.
Oh, I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do. And by the way, if you had your A through E ticket books complete, not any ripped out, you could be peddling those on eBay for quite a pretty penny.
I used them all because we like Disney World so much.
Especially the E tickets. You'd always end up with like a bunch of A's for the trolley on Main Street.
Exactly, but Space Mountain was an E for sure.
Absolutely. You'd barter for those E tickets.
Yeah.
You know, to this day, we still say when something's a wild ride, people of my age category still say, "Wow, that was like an E-ticket ride," and our kids look at us and go, "What? What are you talking about?" I apologize, but I have to sign off. I have a family event tonight, so.
When you were talking about Walt Disney and the paint
Hi,
colors.
Maureen. Thank you. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Maureen.
When you were talking about Walt Disney and the paint colors, I've always been amazed at all of the planning that went into it. In fact, recently on the computer, there was an article about why you will never see mosquitoes at Disney World and what he did to make sure that mosquitoes could not breed, even though it was a swamp originally, what he had done so that it people who go there didn't have to worry about that.
Yeah, there's a whole pest management department that at one point was like largest in the country. I'm not sure that now with other companies doing that, but early on in the 70s, you know, they were really groundbreaking as far as the circle of life and looking for, you know, pests that terrorize others. And, you know, they were the first people that tried the different strings that would keep some of the birds from, you know, and trying to do as much as they could without certain chemicals and, you know, different things. So
Yeah.
they were really on the forefront of some of that early on.
Jody, do you have any fun stories about Roy Disney?
Well, Roy, so I am not quite old enough to have known or worked with Walt, but Walt's nephew, Roy, who was on the board and chairman of the board for a while, was a dear friend. And he just, obviously growing up, you know, we're sharing these stories. I mean, can you imagine, you know, growing up with his dad, Roy, and Uncle Walt, and just running the streets of Disneyland as they were building it and knowing every nook and cranny. But I think even more than just the stories he could tell, it was his passion for the integrity of Disney. And my favorite Roy Disney quote, and from when early on I worked with him, every once in a while when I was in my Synergy job and I was I like to compare it to being somewhat of a traffic controller. You make sure to look for opportunities that everyone can work together, but you also make sure that everyone stays, true to the foundation and on target, and there aren't any kind of wrecks in between. So you're kind of in the middle of the divisions. And there were some folks that were doing in the consumer products area, they were trying to really do a lot of characters together, but they were not in their environments in a way that he felt was true to their character and story. And people kept saying, well, these are extensions of the brand. And it was when people first started talking about branding, and it was kind of the buzzword for everything. Like, we're going to brand this and we're going to do that. And so we were having this meeting and he said, Jody, I don't like that word. He said, branding is what you do to cattle. And that's on the outside. And Disney emulates from the inside. It's what's inside and the foundation and the core that will never change. Now, so for instance, Mickey Mouse can put on costumes, but his ears are always black, his tail's always black. He can put on a hat, but he's not going to change at the core who he is, his personality, and what's, his characteristic and his true character is always going to come out. And he was such a keeper of the flame, but in very just gritty, tangible ways like that, that I think is why Disney was able to stay on target for so long. I think the big test now is as it grows around the world and new businesses and acquisitions. So, how does Disney now owns Marvel? How does Marvel do what they do and do it well, but you don't try to integrate Disney and Marvel because then they both lose their integrity. So I think all the way, that's a long way to answer your question, Woody, about Roy, but I think that's one of my favorite stories because it just showed his passion, and in fairness, his name was on the company. So, he wanted to really impart to all of us that, the core and that name meant something. So that was always my favorite that would come from my time with Roy. And then if you were in a park, just, strap it on for a walk down memory lane and great stories of kids running around and, they would commandeer different attractions and, get lost in the parks and everything.
Jody, going off your point about the acquisitions, what's the lead time when they look at making an acquisition, whether it was ABC Cap Cities or Miramax or Pixar? How do they make sure they're not going to destroy that core or that culture? Because it's such a wonderful thing. And you hear a lot of talk now about Apple potentially acquired Disney, or you see it in the news, which I think it's probably just rumors. But how do you maintain that, or what do they do to prevent that from being destroyed?
So it's a complicated question, and it's less about the time because each acquisition really has a story of its own. And oftentimes, like when you look at Disney's acquisition of Pixar, that was a relationship. Disney was working so closely with Pixar, and John Lasseter, the chief creative talent at Pixar, partnering with Steve Jobs, John grew up at Disney and started as a Disney animator. So it was a shared language and culture that then as you're bringing together, it's like, how do you keep the integrity of both, but the opportunity to build and synergize together? So I think like that's an example that really it was just natural that that was going to happen eventually, because the paths sort of came together in such a beautiful way that then one day it was like, okay, you know, we've acquired Pixar. Similar to George Lucas and the whole, you know, Star Tours, and Star Tours is the attraction at the park, but the Star Wars franchises, and I mean, that was the technology, much of the technology that Lucasfilms developed was used in a lot of the Disney. So those, when it's businesses that are just so meshed, you don't realize it, but there's a lot of back of the house, either technology or talent that's integrated and shared anyway, even if one doesn't acquire the other. So, and a little bit of that is happening with Apple now, which is why those rumors are always out there. And I actually think, and I mean, I don't work there anymore, so I don't, you know anything about anything today, but you know, Apple and Disney shared a lot. They were, you know, Disney puts a lot of their content, and they were the first ones in on a lot of the Apple platforms. And so everyone, because of those relationships that grew up over time, there is a lot of integration. So that's why I think it's out there. It gets a little more complicated when you move into the areas that just instinctively, they're very opposing businesses in some ways. Like, for instance, the whole big, huge opportunity with the ABC ESPN acquisition was really about ESPN. So ESPN has very much a mindset like Disney. You know, it's sports brings people together. It's a family, much different than parent company ABC that, you know, has like a news division. And, you know, there was some early talk that would, when that purchase happened, would the news spin off and get sold because it wasn't as much of a fit. So then you have to look at how can you maybe synergize and maximize things back of the house, but you're not going to integrate or synergize in a way that guests and, you know, folks would see externally. And I think the bigger and the more all these platforms and the way technology has all woven together, I think that's harder to keep separate. So I think the true test will be, is that possible? Or at some point, do you almost have to go back the opposite way and sort of start to make, like, this makes sense together, this doesn't, you know, because you don't have, I mean, to take the extreme, you know, you don't have Mickey Mouse appearing on the news. So that's kind of a non-answer to your question about that it's complicated. There really isn't a time frame. You know, some deals happen faster, but then they've been happening for a long time. Other, you know, deals are just a long time in coming, and it's for the very reasons that you're saying.
Jody, I know you're not there now, but your head must be spinning over what Disney's going through in light of the pandemic and its impact on the business. And for every category of work and education and sports, there are learnings about how things will change. And if you put yourself back into the position as a senior leader, as you were, what do you think they're going through, and what impact do you think this is going to have, not just financially on the business, but the future of gathering in that sort of way, and providing entertainment in that sort of way?
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways we're all going to be in the same boat, and then there's going to be some differences, but that are unique. But I think for the most part, it's going to be slow and steady, test and adjust, keeping in the forefront, safety and service and hospitality. And I created a word that I felt like when we think about, especially in the theme parks, it's servitality, which is a combination of service and hospitality, because so often you get one without the other. And I think the winning combination is always the combination. And I think as we put our toe in the water, so for instance, Shanghai was the first to reopen part of all of the parks last month, and they opened their shopping district and their retail, trying some, social distancing and all the things that we're now putting our toe in the water on. So they're trying those things at Shanghai. But the interesting thing is they're preparing to do a limited opening in the park. And the only way to do that is by reservations. So like that's an example where maybe down the road you'll make a reservation for the park because you can only have so many people in. Maybe you'll, so it's going to be a lot of test and adjust. But the interesting thing is where the end of your question was, do you think, it'll go back and reopen? And I think if Shanghai is an example, so they offered these tickets and within the first hour, they were sold out and there was like thousands, waiting. So people want to get back. And I think Disney's not an exception in that. I mean, I think people, whether it's sports or gatherings, people are cautious and we're all a little nervous. We want to make sure that safety leads and there isn't going to be going back to normal. It's going to be a new normal. And, I think places like Disney are going to be at the forefront of that in the same way we were talking about, pest control. I think they'll be trying different ways and we'll be, gradually, it's not just going to be ready, set, reopen. And whether we're talking, ESPN and covering events or the parks themselves or, the movie theaters as we're hearing. And so, but Disney's committed to it. And you probably heard down, in Orlando, they're opening up, part of the shopping areas and the third-party vendors are coming back in. So they're just slow and steady. And I think, that's always with an eye towards how do we best meet the needs of our guests, which are going to be safety and then servitality, to give great service, but to also be hospitable, but, as safe as we can be.
Yep, excellent, makes sense. And it's going to take time, right? I know there's a lot of excitement.
Totally.
As we speak, my sister is over at New Smyrna Beach on her annual visit there for her birthday. And I'm kind of saying, really, you're going to go to the beach already? Maybe you should wait a little bit. But there she is. Right.
And everyone's going to, it's interesting. One of my nieces was watching an older movie. I don't know if everyone remembers 3 Men and a Baby, the movie, but there's a scene in that movie and they are chasing after one of the guys that has the baby. And they drop off at the airport, they run through the doors, they run through the airport, they run to the gate. I mean, they stop just short of being on the tarmac. They run so far into the airport. And my niece said, that's ridiculous. They didn't go through security. They didn't take off their shoes. They didn't. So she doesn't even, to her everyday normal is you go on a plane ride, you do. So now maybe when you do that, you'll get your temperature taken. That's one of the things they're looking over as they test it out at Shanghai. They're going to take temperatures. now we go through bag checks at Disney. Well, gosh, my first trip to Disney, I mean, if there would have been a security station, you would have thought you were, in a other country, it would seem so foreign. So I just think things that are, we can't just keep looking behind. And I think that's where Disney does a great job of looking forward and going slow and steady, but always an eye on the guest experience.
Jody, I'm an annual pass holder, and every time I go in there, I go Haunted Mansion, hit Space Mountain, Thunder Mountain, Splash Mountain, and I always have this fear that one day I'm going to go in there and one of those rides is going to be gone, or all of them are going to be gone. How protective are they of those things that we've all grown up and loved at Magic Kingdom?
It's all based on, so you should write a lot of letters. Every time you go, you should say how much you're enjoying it, because I felt that way. I mean, I practically chained myself to Country Bear Jamboree. I was like, don't take the bears, because I just picture with my family lined up and the bears would sing and we'd be singing those songs the rest of, the time. And yet you would go in there and literally when I would go back for nostalgia, it would be empty. Well, the real estate in the parks is prime real estate, and they're putting so many people through, and they want to try to give as many people as much time in each experience as they can, that they just can't have, half empty attractions or half empty theaters. Or so I must say, I'm so sorry that I can't 100% tell you don't ever fear that. But if it's Space Mountain, there's such an iconic that they keep upping the experience, being true to the story of Space Mountain, but they've added some G-force. Every time there's new technology for roller coasters, they go in and they make sure that it still captures the heart, but it's also keeping pace with the experience that people come to expect. So it's really all done on, research and capacity and, the guest demand for it.
Well, that's a great point with Space Mountain. When I was there recently, when you're walking up the line, you can tell that some of the stuff's changed, but there's this monitor and the video of the kids riding it is definitely from the 1980s. So it makes me feel like I'm 8 years old and on the ride again, but I can tell the technology is different. It's much more of an exciting ride. So they're doing a great job with that. If that was intentional, they nailed it.
But having said that, back to my traumatic experience with Country Bear Jamboree, it's easier to do at Space Mountain than it is at Country Bear Jamboree. I mean, you can't build a roller coaster through the middle of the Country Bear Jamboree. So, it's different attractions lend themselves to that, to updating the story, keeping the integrity and making sure the experience doesn't feel dated, unless what you also find at Disney is they're masters at, the electrical light parade that's coming back I'm super anxious. Disney will celebrate its 50th birthday in 2021. And, they're talking about a lot of different things, but it'll be interesting. Some of the, especially parades and shows that they might choose, they'll do some that are new and then they'll do some that are nostalgic. And I think that's sort of part of the attraction for Disney as well.
Very cool. Well, Jody, thank you so much. Any final questions? I want to be mindful of your time and everything. Anyone have any final questions? Jody, thank you so much. This is
sure, and I'm so sorry to be hiding on video. I promise I don't have a piece of tape over the camera. I was all ready.
Well, we'll figure it out as soon as the call is over, I'm sure. That's usually
I know. I even set up in front of my Disney curtains. I thought I'd have a little Mickey background for you.
Cool.
Next time. How about that?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well,
so
Jody,
much.
Sorry we missed the video and being able to see you, but thanks for reminding us all of our memories of Disney and adding a whole lot more information surrounded it. Woody, thanks for putting this together. It's really been great.
Absolutely. Well,
Oh,
thank
I
you, Jody.
appreciate it. It was a
Thank
fun
you.
trip down memory lane and to make some new friends. And I just appreciate, and I do anything Adam tells me to do. He's my favorite Stetson student, with all due respect to any of you other Stetson students. But so I'm happy to do it.
Hey, Jody.
Jody, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jody. Really
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great night. Everyone stay well.
Yeah, stay
You
safe
too.
out there. Take care.
Thanks
See
a
you
lot.
again.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.